I'm teasing. Oh, I need a pen out here.
Okay, so those of you that are not muted, if you would please just mute yourself. I might be able to do it here. Yeah, well, some of you I can. Okay, welcome. Welcome, everybody. This week, we're going to do something a little bit different. So I want to share with you that we are going to do the Haftarah for the Parsha this week is the Parsha of Yitro. And for those of you that have looked already at the Hebrew vocabulary that I posted in our community, Yitro is Hebrew for Jethro. And so we're going to do, as always, a summary of the Parsha. I want to spend much more time than I usually do in this series on something that happens in this week's Parsha, and that is the giving of the Ten Commandments, because I think it's a huge topic and I really want to share with you. Then we will do a summary of the Haftarah, which comes from the book of Yeshayahu, from the book of Isaiah, and we'll talk about the parallels between the two and what we can extract from it. But let's start with the summary of the Parsha. So we're in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 20, verse 23. So the name of the Parsha, Yitro, means Jethro, okay? And we find it in the first sentence, as always. Who is Yitro? Yitro was the father-in-law of Moses, okay? And so all of them, remember last week we did the splitting of the sea was in the Parsha. So all of the great miracles that God performed for the people of Israel have already happened. And Yitro, all the way back in Midian, he hears about it and he comes to the Israelite camp and he returns the wife of Moshe and the two sons. You remember from last week that they were sent back when Moshe was going to Egypt to free the Israelite slaves. Yitro advised Aaron, his brother Aaron, said to him, "Why are you bringing two little babies and your wife here when we have all this trouble? Send them back, let them be safe, and you can reunite with them later." And that's in fact what happened. So Yitro comes and he returns the wife Tzipporah and the two sons. He also sees that Moshe is kind of wearing himself out by judging all of the disputes of the community. And so he tells him, you need some help and you need to appoint judges to assist you in this task of governing this enormous people and administering justice. And so Moshe takes his advice. It's interesting to notice Yitro is obviously not from the nation of Israel, but he does give good advice. Then we have the episode where the Israelites camp opposite Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, where they're told that God has chosen them to be this is the language of the Torah, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And the people respond and they proclaim what we say in Hebrew, Naseh v'nishma, what God has, everything that first we will listen and we will do. As God has spoken, we will do that. Then comes the 6th day of the 3rd month, which counting from Nisan is the month of Sivan. It's 7 weeks now after the Exodus, after all of the slaves that are freed now, they all leave Egypt. And they represent what is the entire nation of Israel at that time. And they assemble at the foot of Mount Sinai for Matan Torah, for the giving of the Torah. God descends onto the mountain. There's thunder, there's lightning, there's billowing pillars of smoke, there's the blast of the shofar, and a summons for Moshe to ascend Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. And God proclaims there the 10 commandments. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But what happens is that as God begins to speak, the people say that the revelation of God, it's too intense for them to bear. And so they beg Moses to receive the Torah from God and to convey it to them. That's a very dramatic point. If we think about it, sometimes we think, we wish that God would speak to us. We wish that we could hear from God directly. But in this particular case, these millions of people did hear exactly from that, and they couldn't handle it spiritually, emotionally, whatever. And so the transmission comes through Moshe instead of directly from God. Okay, let's just go a little bit deeper into who Yitro was. So the Talmud tells us that Pharaoh, had three main advisors. One of them was Yitro. This was before he had his whole life in Midian. Another one was Eov, who is Job, and Bil'am, who I think you call Balaam. Anyway, so Paro's deciding what is the most prudent way to exterminate, get rid of this Israelite problem, and he seeks the opinion of these three advisors. And so the tradition is like this. Bilam is the grandson of Lavan. Lavan, of course, is the father of Rivka, and not a good guy. Okay. Bilam is also evil, and he relishes the idea of eradicating the Israelites, and he advises Paro to kill all the male Israelites, which is, of course, a plan you're familiar with. But what do the other two advisors say? One of them, Eov, Job, he's opposed to any plan to destroy the Israelites, but he doesn't want to come right out and say it, so he just refrains from offering any opinion at all. Maybe he knew that his objection would be met with resistance. He might have rationalized that he could do much more to help the plight of this slave nation at some later date if he keeps his loyalties kind of under wraps. He can retain his position as advisor. So as a result, he's silent. He doesn't oppose or accept Bilam's proposal. He just doesn't say anything. And that leads to some problems later in his life, according to this tradition. And the third advisor is Yitro. Yitro is the one who verbally rejects the idea of exterminating the Israelites. He believes that it's wrong, that these people should be made to suffer for no crime other than they're just part of this nation. And his loud protests anger Paro, and that's why he has to flee Egypt in order to save his own life. That's how he ends up in Midian. And the Talmud continues by telling us that each of these three advisors was either rewarded or punished based on how they reacted to this scenario. So Bilam, the one who encouraged the execution of thousands of these innocent Israelite babies, he was killed by the very people that he sought to exterminate in a war. And you can see that if you want to look in the book of Bamidbar, which is the book of Numbers, chapter 31, verse 18, you can look that up. Eov, the Job, the one who remained silent in this critical moment, he was afflicted with his life of pain and suffering. That's a familiar story that a lot of people know. And then Yitro, who fled because of his opposition, he sacrificed his position of leadership and a life of comfort and wealth. And he's in the court of Paro. He's an important guy. He eventually becomes the father-in-law of Moshe, and his descendants become prominent in the leaders because, of course, his daughter marries into the Israelite nation. Okay, so that's like a little background. Now I want to talk for a little while on this concept of the Ten Commandments. We say in English 10 commandments. In Hebrew, it is aseret hadibrot. Aseret just means 10. Okay. Dibrot are things somebody says. So lidaber means to speak. And so they are not, well, what are they exactly? So a lot of Christian scholars see them as universally applicable moral laws for all of humanity. Traditional Jewish theology views them as part of the specific covenant that is binding only on Jews. The Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, are given to Israel, but they do have a message for all of humanity. They're often considered the ethical legacy of the Jewish people to the Western world. By the way, if you have in your house a Christian translation of the Bible and a Jewish translation of the Bible, and you look at the Ten Commandments, you will see that they are not the same. They're mostly the same, but in the beginning, there are some differences owing to Christian theology. Okay, so there's two features that make the Ten Commandments particularly acceptable to the Western mind. One is that most of them are prohibitions, and most of them are ethical in nature rather than ritualistic in nature, so that they don't demand much in terms of behavior. Don't hurt other people, don't lie, believe that God created the world in 6 days. They're not hard things to do. It's not like keeping kosher or not violating Shabbat or something. So dibrot are not commandments. The word in Hebrew for commandments is mitzvot. You probably know that. So it's actually not a very good translation to call them the Ten Commandments. They literally, I would think, A way to say it is the 10 utterances or the 10 statements. They're not written intended as a legal code. They're not understood as individual commandments. They are categories or classifications of commandments. So if you were to do this academic study, you could probably put each of the 613 commandments under one of the general headings, okay? So the 613 mitzvot are detailed covenantal obligations on the Jewish people. The Aseret HaDibrot are more like moral or theological pillars that are commonly divided. This is, by the way, I think what I'm about to tell you now is very fascinating, divided into sets of 5 and 5. So the first 5 refer to one's relationship with God. There are many different ways of dividing up the mitzvot. One of them, I did not put this vocabulary in, so just listen to me because it'll make sense to you, I think, when I explain it. One of the ways of dividing the commandments is depending on what relationship. So there are commandments that refer to between a person and God. We call those bein adam lemakom, between a person and God. There's a between a person and another person. For example, the laws of lashon hara, the laws of evil speech, laws of gossip, whatever you call it. That is bein adam lechavero, between a person and literally means his friend, but between one person and another. And then the third category is between a person and himself or herself. Okay. So in this case, the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements, we'll call them, refer to one's relationship specifically with God. So let's look at the Jewish language of them. I'm going to read for you the expanded language in translation, obviously, of the first 5. So the first is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now you can see that that's a statement. It's not an expectation. It's not a command. It's not, I mean, the implied command is you should believe this, but it's not a commandment in the sense of do this or don't do that. Okay, the second, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image, nor any manner of likeness of anything in heaven above, that is in the earth below, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children of the third and fourth generations of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto the thousandth generation of them that love me and keep my commandments. Obviously, this is about idol worship. We could talk about this and what does it mean and what does it mean visiting, how do you punish children for what their fathers did, blah blah. There's a lot to say about that, but the basic thing is don't worship anything but me. Okay. The third is you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. That teaches us sensitivity. You see how all of these are falling very nicely into the concept of the relationship between a person and God. Okay. The fourth is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but on the seventh unto the Lord your God is a Sabbath day unto the Lord your God. You shall not do any manner of work, you, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your cattle, the stranger that is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. I want to say a couple things. First of all of that language, all that biblical language, is part of the blessing that we use on Shabbat morning when we make kiddush, when we bless the wine or the grape juice. Okay. The fifth one, but still remembering Shabbat or honoring Shabbat in some way is a reflection of one's relationship with God, because you're basically saying, I believe that God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the seventh day. Even though traditionally Christianity has a different day for when is Shabbat, the concept that one day a week should be devoted to more godly things is something we find in Christianity as well. And the fifth one, and this one might surprise you, we'll talk about this in a minute, is honor your father and mother so that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God gives you. Now, this does begin to get a little Jewy here, because the land which the Lord your God gives you obviously is referring to the land of Israel. But let's ask the question, how is honoring your mother and father, what we call in Hebrew, kibbud av ve'em, how is that connected to serving God? It sounds like it should be your relationship with other people, right? It's your relationship with your parents. But it's on the side of between you and God. So how is that connection? You hear the question, right? Okay. So the primary connection is the idea that parents are partners with God in the creation of every child. So the Talmud says there's three partners in a person's creation: the father, the mother, and God. So honoring parents is an extension of honoring the creator who enabled the existence of the parents. Okay. Also, the placement in on this side of, that there were two sets of what we luchot is another word I didn't put in your vocabulary list. I'm sorry, but I know I was going to say this. The tablets, the two tablets, right? So this is all on one. The first five is on one, the second five is on the other. Why is it on the one about between you and God? Because it the fact that it's there is a significant reason for us to understand that honoring parents is considered as if you are honoring God. And there's one more opinion from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who says the obligation to honor your parents is a fundamental act of gratitude, of gratitude to God for bringing a person into the world through the parents. So by respecting the instrument of their creation, a person is showing gratitude and reverence to the creator. In other words, you understand there's a connection here. You would not exist if your parents didn't exist. So you're expressing appreciation to God for the fact that he created your parents. Okay, that's the first five. On the other tablet, on the other luchot, on the whatever, on the other side, the second five has to do with relationships with humans, and these are much more straightforward. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his maidservant, his manservant, his ox, his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor. These five make the case that ethics without a godly direction are unstable. Spirituality without ethics is hollow. This is the ethical part, okay? So the the idea that sometimes Christians, I'm going to say scoff. I'm not sure that's the right word, but the way that I hear it, it's like scoffing, like Jews, all we care about is like the law, the law, the law. But I'm making the case that law is not oppressive. Law is what protects freedom. A free society that doesn't have moral limits, the whole thing will collapse from inside. And so the idea of God saying, I want you to recognize me. He's speaking obviously to the Israelites, although we can extract more universal lessons from it. But he's saying, I am the God who took you out of slavery. I am telling you, this is the way to have a healthy society. Don't do these things, and have this relationship with me. And that is sort of a formula, somewhat a simplified formula, the headlines of a formula for having a good society. Okay. Now, the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements or the 10 commandments, they don't include any punishments. They don't include any enforcement. They don't include any consequences. They are appealing to the conscience, not to fear. So they assume that people want to behave morally, and they are guidance on how moral people could create a moral culture, not just a legal system, which distinguishes Torah from lots of other ancient law codes. Even modern law codes, sort of the implication is if we don't make a law against this, people will do this. We want to make a law against it because we're trying to create a healthy or a crime-free society anyway. So the idea behind this, I think, is God understands that most people, we're talking about normal, healthy people, want to live in a free society, want to live in a moral society. And these are some guidelines. Now, I have to make one important distinction, and that is, I think it's number 6. Wait, I have to go back and look. Yeah, number 6, you shall not murder. In Torah law, do not murder is not equal to do not kill. The Torah distinguishes murder from other kinds of killing, like self-defense or justice or war. Okay. So human life is definitely sacred. There's no question about that. But all killing is not morally equivalent. Okay. So that distinction is an important nuance that I think that God is saying you are capable of understanding that I'm not saying, never kill a person. There are sometimes in cases of war, in cases of self-defense, in cases of applying justice that you need to kill another person, but you can't wantonly murder, okay? Also, do not covet is also revolutionary because it teaches the idea, I mean, revolutionary for its time, that Torah cares about what goes on inside of you, not just your behavior, your desires, your attitudes, your internal moral discipline, not just your ritual behavior. Because a just society isn't built just on laws. It's built on characters. So I said the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 statements or the 10 commandments, it's not a legal system. They're not a replacement for the Noahide laws, um, but they are guidelines um, for living in right alignment with God. And there are among the Aseret HaDibrot, among the 10 statements, there are some that are positive, meaning what to affirm, what to remember, what to actively do, the you shalls. I am the Lord your God. That means acknowledging and recognizing that the source of moral authority comes from God. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That means set aside sacred time, recognize that work and it's not just work, it's also the exertion of power into the world. One of the things that's behind the idea of Shabbat observance is that you cease to as great a degree as humanly possible asserting yourself in the world. So you don't do things with the goal of creating a an outcome. So like for example, one of the laws that Jews are obligated by in Shabbat is we don't plant, we don't build. Okay, those are things that one does that assert our power in changing and shaping the world. We don't do that because we have removed ourselves from that. Another of the 10, the that is positive, meaning you shall, is of course honor your father and mother, showing respect and gratitude to those who give you life. By the way, if any of you have or had an unhealthy relationship, an abusive parent, or an absent parent, or something that was hurtful, the Torah does have guidelines for sort of what the minimum is. Obviously, if your relationship with your parents is a good one, a healthy one, a strong one, then honoring your father and your mother doesn't really have boundaries so much. Well, it does because your first primary loyalty is to your spouse. But the point is that honoring your father and mother, let's say that your father is a narcissist or your mother is abusive or something even worse than that. It's not the Torah is not insensitive to that. And there are very sort of minimal standards. This is not the time for that. I just wanted to mention it because it's not like it's a question that could come up. What if you don't have a good relationship with your parents? So the Torah does address that. The other seven are the category of negative commandments or things you should not do that set moral boundaries. Okay, so you shall have no other gods before me. Don't do that. You shall not make or worship idols. Don't do that. You shall not take God's name in vain. These three together, by the way, not having other gods, not making or worshiping idols, and not using God's name in vain, are sort of a group that guard um, the, the the integrity of your spiritual life and also of your speech. Okay. You shall not murder. That protects the sanctity of human life. You shall not commit adultery, protects the sanctity of the family and the trust between partners. You shall not steal. That preserves the property and the rights of others. You shall not bear false witness. That is you're protecting, you're upholding truth and justice in a social situation. And you shall not covet, interestingly enough, is mostly about what goes on inside of you, right? It's cultivating your inner discipline over acting on your desires. So uh, we were, some of you know this already. My husband and I went to IKEA this week, and IKEA in Israel now has everywhere self-checkout. And to be honest, there's nobody really minding the store. And I said to my husband, there's a lot of ways that you could steal merchandise with this system that they have. It's not a very um, now, obviously, if the population that's shopping there is not of the you shall not steal and you shall not covet things that don't belong to you. Really, it refers to things that your neighbor has. But it would really be very easy to walk out of IKEA without paying for certain things. But one who is a moral person, even if the opportunity presents itself, would not do that because even if the guard at IKEA is not paying such close attention, Hashem is always paying close attention. By the way, the fact that we call Hashem Hashem comes from the one of these about not taking God's name in vain. So we are very careful about when we actually say one of the names of God. And instead, you see that I do, and some of you have adopted this practice in your own lives to refer to God as Hashem, because literally Hashem means the name. And we're referring to God. By the way, God is an English word that doesn't have like the sanctity of a Hebrew name of God. So I will sometimes use God and Hashem interchangeably. But we say Hashem in order to avoid using God's proper name unless we're making a blessing or learning something specific in Torah and so forth. And that's when we are observing the thing about not taking God's name in vain. By the way, I'm not going to say it because I don't say that word, but there is a curse word that has God's name in it. Okay. And we definitely do not say that unless, unless you're not doing what you ought to be doing. Okay. So I was thinking, what's the difference between the Aseret Dibrot that are revealed for the first time in this week's Parsha and the system of mitzvot, the 613 obligations that Jewish people have? Because humanity can receive moral direction and guidance from the Torah without the extensive ritual obligations that fall on Jews. So we talked before about the positive of the Aseret Dibrot and the negative. So the same thing, and I also talked about, remember I said there's lots of different ways to divide up the 613 commandments between a person and God, between a person and another person, and between a person and themselves. There's another way to divide it. There's lots of different ways, but one is positive commandments, that tells us what to do, and negative commandments, which set limits on things that we should not be doing. There is zero issue, as far as I know, with non-Jews keeping the negative commandments, not doing the things that we're not supposed to do. There's 300 of the 613, 365 of them are prohibitive, meaning what you're forbidden from doing. Like if you never want to eat a cheeseburger as a non-Jew, that is completely acceptable. There's no issue with you not eating cheeseburgers because if you can do it because you don't like cheeseburgers, you can do it because cheeseburgers aren't healthy, or you can do it because you understand that God has a preference for not seething a calf in its mother's milk, and there's no issue whatsoever for you doing any of the 365, or that is not doing them. The other 248, if you're doing the math with me, those are what one is commanded to do. Now, many of those can also be kept by non-Jews with two clarifications. One is that the non-Jew needs to understand that they are not obligated to do this, but they're choosing to do such a thing. And the other is that they don't use the blessing with the language of obligation. So let's talk about the first one first. Let's say that a non-Jew it was Sukkot, and they wanted to shake a lulav and an etrog. I don't know if you know what this mitzvah is. There's the 4 species in Sukkot, and you live in a place where you can get a set of, it's called lulavim, the lulav and the hadas and all the different parts of the thing, and you want to shake it on Sukkot. You absolutely can do that if you want to. But what you cannot do is first of all, you have to understand that as a non-Jew, it's not your obligation. God is not demanding that of you. Okay. But you can choose to do it because you love God, because you think it's a cool thing to do, because it makes you feel more connected to your biblical heritage, whatever. but you have to have that distinction. And also, you have to not make the blessing that has the language of obligation. So the phrase is, if you know anything about blessings in Judaism, blessings in a Torah life, there's certain blessings, like if I was going to eat an apple, let's say, I would make a blessing on the apple, and I would say, blessed are you, God, for creating the fruit of the trees, because apples grow on trees. Okay. It's not, that's fine. You can even say those blessings. What you cannot say is Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us. That's the translation of that phrase. So whenever a blessing includes the word vitzivanu, it signals that this is an obligatory commandment and not just what a practice that somebody might find meaningful. So some examples of that we would make that blessing on. One is natilat yadayim, ritual hand washing. So, like before we eat bread, we wash our hands in a ritual way. We're not talking soap and water because your hands are dirty and you're going to go eat. This is a ritual hand washing. Torah study, lighting Shabbat candles or candles before a holiday, making kiddush, making the blessing on wine before a Shabbat or a holiday meal, lighting Hanukkah candles, taking a portion of the challah dough, separating challah, immersing in a mikveh, eating matzah. Now, a non-Jew can actually do all of those things, but cannot make the blessing. That's an important distinction. Okay, let's let's go on and talk about what are some of the universal ethics of the Aseret HaDibrot. Okay, um, so we'll go through these one at a time. These don't have to do with ritual practice. They don't have to do with Jew versus non-Jew. They have to do with universal lessons that come from, even though I call them the Ten Commandments, I've explained to you why that's not a very good way of describing it, but for ease of use, the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments. The first one, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery. So an ethical practice begins with the recognition that human beings are not each other's property. And a just society remembers that you can't abuse or enslave people. That's no way to run a society. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two, you shall have no other gods before me. We've talked about this in the context of idol worship, but anytime anything, the state or money or technology or ego um, or race, in the case of the Nazi ideology, becomes the ultimate value, that is dangerous for human dignity. Okay. So you can't worship or hold as more important, that's a better way of saying it, anything above God. That's the second lesson. The third lesson, you shall not take the divine name in vain. The invoking God or values or truth demands responsibility. So, one of the things that's so twisted about the jihadi mentality is that they use sacred language and invoking God's name to justify violence. And that is exactly a violation of the third of the 10. Okay. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So this is what's the universal message? That human worth is not measured only by its productivity. A humane society protects the concept of rest for individuals, for families, for the workers that make the society run, even for the earth, because we have the concept of the Sabbath every 7 years for the land. But also, if you can take it one step further, a person who is no longer productive in the way that we generally think of productivity, let's say because they're ill or disabled or some way, they are not like productive in a normal way, or maybe they're just retired. Maybe there's nothing wrong with them physically. They just don't go to work every day anymore. That remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy is a reminder that that is also valuable. You could imagine what a society would be like, and I'm sure if I knew world history better, there would be such a society where if somebody's no longer productive, they are no longer valued in the society. You could see how that's a twisted distortion of the idea that every person has godly value. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. So the ethics of life is rooted in acknowledging those who gave us life, gave us guidance. Respect for elders is something that helps sustain culture, helps sustain memory, helps create a situation of social stability. If you live in a culture that has no respect for the elderly, then you can't transmit your culture from one generation to the next, because as soon as somebody ages out of the system, they're no longer considered to have value. So honoring your father and your mother is a way of saying previous generations also have value as part of the link in the chain. Okay, you shall not murder. Human life is inherently sacred. Every religion, I think, except for the jihadis, they believe that. Not to be treated as disposable. Violence, cruelty, dehumanization. These are failures of morality, not expressions of morality. And societies that have random acts of violence in their character are inherently immoral, and they will not survive. They cannot survive. They can survive for a period of time, but think of the Nazis, okay? For whatever 10 years or whatever period of time, they were ascending. But where are Nazis now? I mean, there are neo-Nazis and so forth, but the power that the Nazis had over um, Europe, over Germany and the rest of Eastern Europe and other parts of the country, it's gone now. It can't sustain itself. And with God's help, the same thing will happen with the jihadis that are, this is, their society is built on violence, and that is inherently immoral. And just, I just want to remember what we said before, that the Torah distinguishes murder um, from justice or self-defense or acts of war. Okay, you shall not commit adultery. Number 7, intimate relationships have moral responsibilities, and betrayal doesn't just damage individuals. Stable societies depend on trust and loyalty and respect within families. So uh, a society where adultery is not condemned is an inherently immoral society, and it's an unstable society. Number 8, you shall not steal. So this is so simple. What belongs to somebody else is not yours to take, not by force, not by fraud, not by manipulation. That economic systems have to be built on fairness and not exploitation in order for them to be godly and sustainable. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. I'm almost finished with this, and then we're going to get to the Haftarah. Society can't survive without honesty, especially when we're talking about courts and leadership and public discourse. That falsehood corrodes trust and destroys institutions. And number 10, you shall not covet. This is the idea, again, the internality, that ethics are not only about how you behave, but also about cultivating your inner restraint, because unchecked desire automatically leads to justice. You can't think of a scenario where somebody has a desire for something that does not belong to them that has a good outcome unless they don't act on it. Okay, so a moral society begins with freedom and survives if the people in the society have inner discipline. I knew that was going to take a long time. I really wanted to go into that. Let's see how far we get with the Haftarah. And we'll turn our attention now to the actual Haftarah of Parshat Yitro. And this is in Yeshayahu, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 1 to chapter 7, verse 6. And then we skip a bunch, and it is 2 verses at the beginning of chapter 9, verses 5 and 6. Okay. So in the Parsha of Yitro, we read about this wondrous revelation of Torah, that the Israelites are awestruck because they're experiencing God's presence in real time. And as it says in the Parsha, I'm going to just read you, this is from Shemot, the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 15. All the people saw the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn, and the mountain smoking, and they fell back and stood at a distance. So it's kind of this, if you've ever been in a situation where you heard a super loud noise that you felt in your body, it is something like that. Like it was so, the other night, or it was like early in the morning, and there was a thunderclap that was so loud. It was just one, and it was so loud, it like literally shook my insides. Imagine that times, like, I don't know, a power of a million or something. Because imagine if God were to, this is what happens. He somehow revealed himself and started speaking in this very dramatic, very loud environment. And anyway, so that's a scenario. Now, what does that have to do with the Haftarah? The Haftarah selection for this Torah portion retells the account of another time when God revealed himself. And that was the first vision of the prophet Isaiah, in which he becomes inaugurated as a prophet. So here's the vision of Isaiah. You can read about it if you look at the chapters I told you about. God is on some, now this is only between Isaiah and God. Okay, it's not like all the people are able to see this, but God is seated on a throne. He's surrounded by these attendants who are six-winged creatures, and those creatures are called seraphs. And they say to each other these words from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3: Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts, his presence fills all the earth. That actually is part of the synagogue liturgy. There's a prayer called Kedusha. Literally, Kedusha means holiness. And we say that. And when we say, so it's like we're saying the words of these celestial angelic beings. And when we say holy, 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 which is kadosh, 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 we stand up, like lift our heels. It's hard to explain, but imagine you're standing and you do this with your feet every time you say that word. It's very dramatic. Anyway, so the seraphs are crying out to each other, and the doorposts, this is back in Isaiah's vision, the doorposts are shaking, the house of God is filled with smoke, and Isaiah is, as the people were in the time of the giving of the Torah, he's startled, and he also feels very humble, and he says, "Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts." So he's saying basically, God, I can't believe you're coming to me. Who am I to receive the divine countenance? Um, Nevertheless, God has picked him. And so, despite the fact that he's hesitating and he has some self-doubt, he is, in fact, initiated or inaugurated as a prophet. There's a scene or a line where one of the angels takes coal and touches it to Isaiah's lips, and he declares that Isaiah's sin is now purged. That action is reminiscent of a midrash, of a story of Moses when he is a young boy, and he's growing up, remember, in the house of Paro, and Paro's advisors say, you got to watch out for this kid. He has his eyes on your crown, because he was playing around and reaching. And in my imagination, this scene that I'm describing happens when Moshe is like 3, 4 years old. He's a little boy. And so they devise this test. This probably, he doesn't understand the significance of the crown. He doesn't have aspirations to take over for Paro. He's just attracted because it's a shiny thing. So let's give him some shiny coal and see if he takes that. And anyway, it reminded me of that. But anyway, Isaiah's sins are purged, and then God addresses him directly. And God says, basically, I have this message for my people. Who should I send? Who will go for us? And Yeshayahu, Isaiah, volunteers himself. And he says the famous words, here I am, send me. Okay. And so he learns that he's being sent on a mission to tell the people of Israel that their temple is going to be destroyed and they are going to be sent into exile. This is first temple period. And that the destruction is going to be complete, and it's a done deal. Basically, the towns are going to be emptied, the houses are going to be emptied of their inhabitants, the ground is going to be completely deserted. But all hope should not be lost. This is part of Isaiah's message, that certain trees, even if you cut them down, the stumps can regenerate. So he's told that there's a tenth of the people who will remain. Um, and so it seems to indicate that the entire people is going to be destroyed, but 1/10 will survive enough to regenerate the Jewish people. In the Ashkenazi tradition, which is slightly different than the Sephardi tradition, we add those two verses in chapter 9, which conclude with a hopeful message, which is about a king who is going to rule Israel in a peaceful time and with justice. So I think, I don't know if we're going to get to universal wisdom, but let me at least do the parallels, okay? So some of them might be really obvious to you already, but let's spell them out, okay? So one is God makes himself known. In the Parsha of Yitro, God reveals himself openly at Har Sinai. Thunder, lightning, fire, cloud, sound, blah, blah. Everybody witnesses revelation. In the Haftarah, Isaiah experiences also some overwhelming revelation of God enthroned in heaven, surrounded by seraphim. So the idea, the parallel is that revelation, godly revelation, is often awe-inducing and it can be destabilizing, whether it's national or personal. Encountering God kind of shakes us up, right? We go through our lives, and some of you may have stories like this. Maybe in the Q&A we can talk about this for yourselves, that you may have had an encounter with God that has shaken you in some way, because even if we know intellectually that God exists, God created the world, God's running the world, he's a creator and sustainer of the world, blah, blah, that's very different than actually feeling a revelation. Okay, that's the first parallel. The second is fear that comes up in the presence of God. So in Yitro, the people they pull back in fear and they ask Moshe to act as their intermediary, where they literally in chapter 20, verse 16 say, "You speak to us, but let not God speak to us," because we can't handle that level of closeness. The Haftarah, Isaiah says, um, in chapter 6, verse 5, he says, like, I'm literally, this translation says, "I am undone because I have seen the king." Like, I'm not worthy of this, and it engenders fear. Okay, so the parallel is that a direct encounter with holiness can expose human frailty. There are many people whose spiritual stories talk about a moment in time where they felt like they were in the presence of God and it revealed something and changed their lives. That is not an uncommon human experience. Okay, a third is the concept of there being mediators between heaven and earth. So in the Parsha, Moshe ascends Har Sinai, gets the Torah on behalf of the people. In the Haftarah, it's Isaiah, Yeshayahu, that is purified by this coal, and then he is sent as a messenger to Israel. So there's Moshe in between God and the people, and there's Isaiah in between God and the people. So God chooses human beings to translate his divine will into earthly reality. It While we may have a personal relationship with God, which is a much more of a Christian language than Jewish language, but we may have it on some level. In both of these scenarios, the relationship, when God has a message he wants to transmit to an entire people, he does it through a third party. Okay. Also, the concept of holiness requiring preparation. So in the Parsha, there's 3 days before the revelation, before the giving of the Torah, that Israel has to prepare. They have to refrain from marital intimacy. They have to wash their clothes. They have to sort of begin to like get ready for this. And also what is the preparation before Yeshayahu, before Isaiah becomes a prophet? His lips have to be purified with this coal situation before they can be used to speak God's words. So access to holiness, it's not casual. A spiritual encounter requires readiness and even a transformation. There's a tradition that our rabbis used to prepare for an hour before they began praying to make sure that their prayers were being said in the right frame of mind. There's an expression, I did put this in your vocabulary list, da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. That when you are praying, it's not enough just to be saying words. You have to have a kind of mindfulness, not in the sense of emptying your mind, which sounds sort of Eastern, like just think of nothing, but orienting yourself towards God's presence in all of your moments, especially in your moments of prayer. It's one of the reasons why all around the world, wherever Jews pray, they face Jerusalem. And it is part of that process of mindfulness, because we believe that prayers ascend to heaven through Jerusalem. We believe that facing Jerusalem is an expression of that. So it's not mindful. You wouldn't necessarily just start talking to God. You have to like get yourself in the right headspace for that. Okay. Also, a couple more. Revelation leads to responsibility. So in the Parsha, revelation, immediately what comes? The commandments that the nation's ethical, social, spiritual obligations are all spelled out. And in the Haftarah, when Isaiah has a revelation, it leads to a mission, the responsibility of a mission. Okay. So revelation is not the end of the story. It demands that after you've had this revelation, you need to take some kind of action. Um, Also, another parallel is the concept of the kingship of God. You begin to understand, by the way, week after week after week, when I show you what the rabbis were thinking about why they put these two texts together, okay, and where they saw these parallels that I'm explicating for them. I guess they just they knew the Bible like um, so closely that they just said, oh, well, this matches this. Let's use this text for that. Okay. The last parallel is the kingship of God. So the very first of the Seret Dibrot of the Ten Commandments opens with this concept of divine sovereignty. I am the Lord your God. And in the Haftarah, God is explicitly described as being a king seated on this lofty throne surrounded by these celestial beings. And both texts proclaim God as supreme authority, God as lawgiver, God as ruler, God as the big cheese. So Yitro, the Parsha of Yitro, just to conclude this part, shows how God reveals himself to form a people. And the Haftarah shows how God reveals himself to form a prophet. Both of these texts, the Parsha and the Haftarah, are teaching that an encounter with God, as I was saying before, that revelation is not the end of the story. It's just now what? And it kind of reminds me of when I had this insight on September 11th, 2001. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't hear, I don't want to overstate it. It's not like I heard God voice exactly. It was like suddenly something became super clear to me. What was that something? That the United States of America was a host country for my people, and that this message was it is time to move and leave this exile. And it was very revelatory in the sense of like it kind of came out of, it didn't come out of nowhere, obviously, because on September 11th, dramatic things happened. But for me, I got this revelation in a most dramatic way because it wasn't something I figured out, I thought about a long time. It looks like, oh, suddenly it was super clear. And it meant I had to do something now. God revealed a truth to me. The United States is just another host country for the Jewish people. It is not the eternal home of my nation. I need to move to Israel. So, and okay, it took me a long time to do it, but I did eventually do it. That I took that revelation and took action on it in order to fulfill the mission that God was showing me. I did prepare some universal wisdom, but as I'm looking at the time, we're kind of out of time. So let me see. I'm just scanning to see if I can um, pick one. I'll do this one because I know that a lot of you have said to me that one of the Torah teachings that means a lot to you um, is, I'm sorry, I'm sort of half looking at Valerie's comment. But it is this concept that words shape reality. Because this in the Haftarah, there's a focus on Isaiah's lips and on purifying his lips so that it is highlighting the power of speech. So, what's the universal lesson? That words can elevate societies or corrupt societies, that ethical speech is a foundation to ethical living, and we are obligated to be intentional with our language, to use language in a truthful way, to use it in a restrained way, meaning everything. There's this Yiddish expression that oh, I wish I could remember how it goes, but the idea is basically teaching you don't have to say every single thing that comes to your mind. Sometimes it's more important like to restrain yourself, but also that constructive speech builds trust, builds communities. And then I'm looking at the time, so I'll just end with this last one, that moral leadership can be an uncomfortable position. Isaiah and every prophet, I think, if you study the prophets, they're all sent to a resistant people. Their tasks, especially Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, are difficult and thankless. And so the universal lesson is that doing what's right doesn't guarantee popularity. That integrity often means that you have to stand firm in what you believe to be correct, despite resistance or pushback from others, so that your the measure of success is your faithfulness to your values, not the applause of others, not the idea that other people are agreeing with you or whatever. Okay, that that is our that's our hour. So I'm going to end this recording, and I'm going to invite you guys to click on the link again so that we can come back and talk to one another. All right. For those watching on YouTube, see you next week.